Once upon a time, there was a village. It was quiet and unassuming, the sort of place where one could grow up, start a family, and die. But it was also the type of place where visitors only ever passed through. They never stayed, and they never remembered their time in the town. It was a simple life, not rich, not fulfilling, just simple. The people there could be described as content, but not happy. They did not leave, however, because it was all that they had ever known. The only interesting thing about the village was the little house atop the highest hill in the deepest forest. Many of the villagers would spend their time whispering about the place. Some had tried to venture forward to inspect it for themselves, but the stories about it filled them with as much fear as it did intrigue. There was a rumour that it belonged to a witch, a haggard old woman who lured children to her doorstep in order to devour their flesh. Others said that it belonged to a Puritan, a woman so involved with God that she locked herself away to dedicate her time to worship. The truth was somewhere in between. For inside the house on the hill in the forest, there lived a creature not from this world, one who would conjure herself into the dreams of men in order to feast. It was not out of malice that this act was performed, it was just the way her kind would feed, for she was a succubus. She came to this village so long ago to the point where no one in town could recall the house's construction. The succubus rarely found reason to leave her small haven. She was so old and had devoured so many souls that she only ever needed to come out once a year to feed. The rest of the time she waited in solitude. A simple life. The winter months that year were especially harsh. The chilled winds came early and killed many of the crops before the harvest. The villagers became frightened that there would not be enough to eat, so it was decided that they must go out beyond the town and trade with other villagers. Before the snows had a chance to settle in, the men of the town gathered together to board their largest ship. News of this adventure reached the succubus to her house. Nearly all the men would be aboard that ship, and out to sea where they would have no escape. It would be the perfect hunting ground for her. Now the succubus had a human disguise. When she approached the ship, no one in the village recognized her. They assumed that she must have been a traveler, and she was so charmingly beautiful that they welcomed her to board. What the succubus and the sailors did not know was that nearby lurked a siren. The aquatic creature was also ancient to this world. She had swam across many different seas in search for new prey. When she saw the men climb aboard their ship, she knew that it would be perfect. This was not her trying to be cruel. Sirens were put on this earth to do one thing, and that was to cause storms which sank ships. None the wiser to either predator, the men sailed out into the ocean. During the day, their time was peaceful. The waters were calm and the winds were strong enough only to push them forward. By night, however, it was quite a different story. Once the men fell asleep, each of them began to dream about the beautiful woman who had come aboard with them. In their mind's eye, they saw what it would be like to hold her, to press their mouth on hers, to wrap their arms around her and pull her in close. The visions were so real that they could nearly feel her warm, soft body in their grasps. But of course, this was all no dream. The succubus had entered their minds and began to drain them of their souls. She continued her feast until a high-pitched sound began to ring in her ears. It was an old song, one she had not heard since the dawn of time, but she remembered it all the same. She ran to the edge of the boat to see what was happening. In the distance, she spotted the siren. The succubus felt helpless. She tried to call out to the other predator, but her cries could not be heard over the song's piercing melody. Thunder roared and lightning flashed as the storm this siren conjured picked up. The ship rocked back and forth over the waves. One by one, the men fell out of the succubus's spell and under the sirens. They jumped overboard, rushing past the succubus as they did so. All the while, the ship threw itself in every direction until the succubus could hold back no longer and fell into the sea. Immediately, her human disguise began to melt away, and the ocean's salty waters burned at her skin. It was so intense that smoke began to rise up where she was drowning. The sight of her caught the siren's attention. It was an unfamiliar sight, to be sure, but ancients recognize other ancients. The siren knew at once that the succubus did not belong in the sea. She knew that the succubus did not deserve to die by its waves. They had both been acting out of instincts. So she dived into the waters and swam up to the succubus. The siren grabbed onto her and pulled the two of them above the surface. Without her singing, the storm calmed itself as the siren took the succubus to the shoreline. Once they arrived, she set the fiery predator down on the beach. The succubus did not stir. This worried the siren. It was difficult for her to crawl along the ground, but she did so in order to find branches and carry them back. The siren had seen stranded sailors before rub the sticks together to make fire, and that was what she did now. When the flames finally began to spark, they popped out and burned at the siren so that she jumped back. Yet she stayed put as the fire began to grow. The heat revived the succubus, who then sat up to look upon her saviour. The two were curious about one another. They had known all about the ancients in this world, but they had never seen the other in life before. Despite their differences, however, the siren and the succubus gazed into each other's eyes, and they knew one another. They reached out to press their palms together, but as soon as their skin met, they burned one another. This revelation brought great sadness to them, because they had never longed to hold someone before tonight. Then, the succubus had an idea. She resumed her human disguise. The siren understood, and also dawned upon her disguise. Now that their ancient flesh was concealed, the two reached for each other's hand yet again. This time they were able to grasp onto one another. Once they were able to embrace, they knew that they could never be separated again. The succubus took her new companion back to the town. The villagers watched as the pair of strange women made their way past the buildings and towards the forest. As they entered, bits and pieces of the ship's wreckage also came up on the shoreline. The town came in and gathered up the driftwood, their fears heightened at the thought of winter and the men they had sent out to their deaths. They did not think these two arrivals were a coincidence. The charms which came from their human disguises were lost on the suspicious crowd, but with no evidence, they let them disappear into the trees. The siren and the succubus were happy for a time. They often spent their days sharing stories from their lives and all the things they'd seen in the sea and in dreams. Then at night, they would dance under the stars. They found peace in not needing to hide their true nature from one another, even though they had to conceal their real forms underneath human skin. One day, the succubus woke up to see her siren staring out the window. She was gazing longingly at the sea. The succubus knew that this arrangement would be harder on her lover than herself. After all, it wasn't as if the succubus could live under the ocean as the siren could adapt on land. It still pained her to see her beloved so full of melancholy. She felt sympathetic as well. She knew why her siren was staring into the sea today of all days. Both of them were becoming hungry. But the siren could not feast on dreams, and the succubus could not enter the sea. So that evening, the two of them set off into town. Most of the villagers were asleep in their own homes, but there was one place where a small crowd of them still gathered. It was a place where men became drunken fools, and where women earned their nightly keep. The siren and the succubus knew that their presence would go unnoticed in such a place, and that it would provide them with high-quality prey. All too soon they stumbled across a man who was off in a corner. He was shouting at the woman sitting with him. She in turn was pushing him away, but the man would not comply. Just as he began to raise a hand, the siren and the succubus approached. They offered him what the woman refused. Now the man remembered the day these two women came into town, but he was so drunk that his suspicions were dulled. He listened as they lured him outside. Unbeknownst to the siren or the succubus, there was another villager watching as the scene played out. He was a man born into a cold world, and had lived a much more difficult life than most of the other villagers. His suspicions were higher than anyone else in town. He followed the three of them out the door and into the forest. In the distance he saw the dim light of a fire burning. He walked over, slow and careful, so as to not arouse their attention. Then he peeked through the leaves to witness a most unholy sight. There were the two women dancing around the fire, dressed only in the night sky. They sang in a language he did not understand. When they finished their dance, they embraced one another, their lips meeting as though they were husband and wife. That was when the man spotted the most unholy sight of all. There, next to the flames and branches, was the corpse of the one they had brought out here. The man knew for certain, then, that these were evil creatures and had to be stopped. He ran back into town to warn the rest of the village. When the sun rose the next morning, the Siren and the Succubus were asleep in bed together, content in their fullness. They bolted up from their drowsy daze as the door was bashed in. Before they could even fight back, the villagers came in and overpowered the pair. They took the Siren and the Succubus into the middle of town. A well waited to drown the Succubus, and a pyre stood to wait to burn the Siren. As the crowd brought them closer to their fate, the two were torn farther and farther apart. They reached out for each other, longing to embrace one last time. The Siren wondered how she could have ever missed her life in the sea, and the Succubus wondered how she had ever spent so long alone. Their time together had been so brief compared to the rest of their endless lives. Now it was over. Yet if they could do it all again, they would have chosen the same path. Whichever direction led to the other, they would have taken. They knew they would not truly be gone, only their flesh would be destroyed. A spirit never dies. The last thing the Succubus saw before the crowd threw her down the well was her Siren being tied to the pyre. Smoke began to raise as she fell down, lower and lower still, until she thought she might reach Hades before hitting the bottom of the well. But she never reached it. Something grabbed her and held her in place. Her feet fell against nothing, and yet she did not fall. There she turned around to see who had saved her, and came face to face with her Siren once more. The two of them were dancing in the clouds, not in their human disguises, but as they truly were. Her Siren was floating in her magnificent tail, which the Succubus had not seen since the day they first met. As they continued to hold on, it dawned upon the Siren that their touch was not burning one another. The two of them simply existed together, in pure honesty, up in the sky. They came in closer and kissed. It was the most wondrous moment of their entire existence. Then all of it gently melted away, until the two of them were asleep in their bed once more. Their ancient flesh was shed once more, replaced with human skin. Yet these were not disguises. Their original bodies were destroyed, but now they were reborn as mortal women. No more need to hunt, no more need to hide. It was just another day of them waking up to their life together